noise, and welcome back to another episode of Kicking It with Key. Happy Resurrection Sunday. In my faith, we believe that Jesus died and rose again to provide eternal life and out of love for God, from God for us. And so today we are celebrating that. Most people call it Easter, but we don't call it Resurrection Sunday, baby, okay? So today we're talking about self-forgiveness. And this is a tough one for a lot of people. So I thought that this would be a really good conversation to have, especially since we have to forgive ourselves in order to move forward into purpose and to truly cut the noise and live in our mindfulness, self-care, and community care in the way that we should. And when we're able to forgive ourselves, then we can forgive other people in our lives and then cultivate more and more love, because that's what it's all about. Today we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about just what it looks like when you're not forgiving yourself and when you have a lack of self-forgiveness. And we're going to also talk about tips for self-forgiveness that you can start using today. And I want that for you. And so let's get into it. Let's get into some of the things that we need to know and to be able to recognize when we're not forgiving ourselves and our tips. Let's do it. So y'all know I'm a teacher, so I want to frame our conversation today just so that we can make sure that we know that we're operating from a common truth. And so the common truth that I want to operate from today is you did the best you could with the information you had at that time. And oftentimes, part of the reason we're unable to forgive ourselves is because we believe that we should have known better. And maybe you did know better, and maybe you didn't. But you did the best you could at that time with the information that you had, with the capacity that you had. And it does you no good to stay in that place of unforgiveness of self, because you can't get close to the purpose that way. So we're going to operate with the affirmation, I did the best I could with the information that I had at the time. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know I say this all the time, because there are things in my life that I in my mind created the story so that I allowed these things and I let things slide and I let things happen, and it's been hard to forgive myself for that. But the reality is I did the best I could, and I'm constantly learning and growing. And if you're a person of faith like me, I know that I've been forgiven by God, so I must forgive myself. And I must celebrate the work of the Creator, which is me, and really forgive myself because I've already been forgiven by my source. And so by the Spirit, I move forward and know that I can be forgiven. So that's our common truth. Let's jump into some things that we should look for to notice when we're not able to forgive ourselves or when there's a lack of self-forgiveness. All right, so one of the things that you're going to notice, or you should notice, in order to realize when you have a lack of self-forgiveness, what does it look like? It looks like perfectionism. When you're working so hard to appear perfect, you're working so hard to make sure that you're doing everything correctly, you fall into people pleasing. All of that kind of falls under the umbrella of perfectionism. You're trying to make sure that you don't make that same mistake again. The other thing that might show up when you have a lack of self-forgiveness is this idea of negative self-talk. And I've talked to y'all about this many, many times before, so I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but it's when your inner critic begins to win in your life, when you're having a lot of negative self-talk, and it's like, oh, man, you shouldn't have done that. You remember it's like you create the story, you run that tape over and over and over in your mind of what you did, what you should have done, why you didn't do what you needed to do, all these things that don't even serve you in this current moment, right? Yes, you should be learning lessons from the mistakes that you make, but you should not be beating yourself up at every turn because you made those mistakes. All right, the next thing you should be looking for to realize whether or not you have forgiven yourself, honey, is projection. So I've seen people talk about this a lot on Twitter. Some correctly, some incorrectly, share. But projection is when you basically take things that you're dealing with on the inside, whether you know it or not, don't know it, and you project them onto other people. right? You place those traits and characteristics that you possess that are usually negative or usually, right? When people talk about projection, it's usually not a positive thing. Oh, I'm projecting this positivity on you. No, people don't say that. People are usually talking about your toxicity or things that you do in your life that are not necessarily helpful. And so oftentimes people will project things onto you because they have not dealt with things internally. So if you find yourself projecting your insecurities, your issues, your traumas onto other people, then you may not have forgiven yourself. Okay, so the last thing that I want you to really be looking for to see whether or not you've forgiven yourself is self-sabotage. When you get good things, do you find yourself messing them up because you get in your own way? Many of us deal with that because sometimes we feel like because of the mistakes that we made, we are undeserving. And I'm here to tell you today that that is not true. There's always redemption. There's always a fresh start. You can always start over. So today is your start over point, honey. You're going to learn to forgive yourself. You are going to learn to love yourself, and you're going to learn to move forward every single day. And it is a journey. And even after you feel like, oh, I love myself, baby, I can forgive myself, you may have moments where you have to remember, you may have to come back to this video. You may have to share this video with somebody who needs it. Do what works for you. Okay? So let's jump into some tips because we talked about how we identify it. Great, wonderful. Let's move into some tips on how you can deal with it and how you can move forward. All right. So tip number one for how you can work on self-forgiveness and truly practice it is releasing to receive. So I recently took a course from Alex L. Y'all know I love her. She wrote After the Rain, yada, yada, yada. You know the story. You know the vibes. We have very similar working methods in the way that we teach people how to do this work. And so I really enjoy spending time with her. Just an authentic, beautiful soul. So she talks about releasing to receive jars. So she had us create a jar where all the things that we want to release and then all the things we want to receive. Because the reality is when you are releasing things, you make space for other things to occur. When you are unable to forgive yourself, you're actually blocking yourself from a lot more things and a lot more blessings that could be coming into your life. But right now, you don't even have the capacity to hold all those things because you have not forgiven yourself. And I'm going to say this many times throughout this video. It's what you deserve. Forgiveness is something that you need in order to get closer to wherever you need to go in your life. So your releasing to receive jars can be a really great thing. So I, start out with the list of things you want to release. And this work won't always be easy. So keep that in mind, right? You might have to take breaks and come back to it later. Work at your own pace because your healing is your responsibility and it's something that will propel you forward into purpose. And releasing leads to abundance, right? Many of us have a lack mindset, and I've experienced that, right? So we're moving into a space where we can create more space. Come on, space. That's the word for today. But we're creating more space in our lives for all the good things, as SZA would say. And so moving forward, I want you to consider that, and we're going to move on to tip number 2. All right. So tip number 2 is about acknowledging that forgiveness is necessary. Oftentimes, we have a hard time, acknowledging that this is work that needs to happen. And so I want you to acknowledge that forgiveness is necessary and acknowledge that it is possible as well. So the affirmation I want you to consider is, I am forgiven, because you are. We're going to operate as though this has already happened. Acknowledge that it's necessary and then start moving forward in saying, I am forgiven. Every time that you encounter a moment where you are shaming yourself from something that's happened before, that's happened in your past, I am forgiven. And unpack that and let it go, right? And that is not easy, which is why you're doing the releasing to receive jars, which is why you're acknowledging that you need to forgive. And every time that moments come up, you will say, I am forgiven. Meet your inner critic with, I am forgiven. And that's just that, on that. All right, so tip number 3 is going to have a lot to do with creating the life that you want. So I want you to visualize when you get some time in your meditation time as you're sitting in your quiet and your journaling. I really want you to envision, to visualize what it would look like for you to walk into a life of forgiveness. What would it look like for you to forgive yourself? What would be the reward of you forgiving yourself? How would you behave? How would you act? How would you treat yourself after you've forgiven yourself? What would it look like to be forgiven? I want you to consider that, because the reality is we need to see it in our mind's eye before we see it in the natural, because we won't think it's possible until we can envision it for ourselves. People always talk about how representation matters, right? How you need to see somebody doing a job in order for you to know that you're capable of doing the job. It is very similar to this. Like, you need to be able to see yourself walking in the life that you want in order for you to get the life that you want. And it's not always that simple, right? I talked about the work that's required. Take a moment, use these tips, honey, because you need them and you deserve to forgive yourself. And remember, we're always operating in the truth that we did the best we could with the information that we had and the capacity that we had and the abilities that we had. And so we walk into self-forgiveness because it's what we deserve. And we walk into self-forgiveness because we're trying to create the life that we want. And that's just... So, let's move on to announcements with Key. And then I'm going to let y'all go. All right. So, announcements with Key. Let's get into some announcements. First and foremost, remember, you can always send me topics and suggestions for episodes and things you want to talk about, because I want to make sure I'm meeting your need. Second thing is, I'm going to always say this because I want to make sure we're spreading this message across the world. If you know of a school, community group, or you that needs a little extra self-care, mindfulness, and community care, I offer workshops, one-on-one consultation sessions, all the things, and meditation, which that's coming really soon. I know I've been saying that, but good things take time, and I just don't believe in rushing things that you all need. I like to make sure that they're ready when they are, and I like to do my research and make sure that they're the best that they could possibly be. So tap in for that. Make sure that you're texting and subscribing at the number below, okay, because you deserve and you need that. And make sure that you're tuning in every Sunday. I'm trying to get to every Sunday on YouTube. Okay, it is hard, but I'm trying to get there for sure, for sure. And IG Lives every Thursday. I love y'all for real. Remember to forgive yourselves and to cut that noise and get closer to purpose through mindfulness, self-care, and community care. See y'all later.